welcome back to the HR Exchange podcast. My name is David Rice. I'm the editor of the HR Exchange Network and your host as usual. Today, I am joined by Dan Kaplan. He is a partner at Foley and Lardner and the co-chair of the firm's National Labor and Employment Practice to talk about some various things about the return to work and vaccines. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're doing this at a time when folks are talking about going back to offices and how do we return to work safely. And we're seeing this return to work now. And as vaccines get administered at different rates across the country, there's sort of a different state and local orders for businesses to abide by. So, can you give us an idea of sort of the shifting regulatory landscape and what sort of impact that has on the decision-making process for businesses when it comes to bringing people back in?
Yeah, absolutely, David. That's a great question. For the most part, businesses have to comply with their local municipality order, county order, or state order. That is the first and foremost direction that any business needs to look to in order to bring employees back into the workspace. Unfortunately, the U.S. never had a national order or anything that applied from a mask mandate or otherwise, or vaccination policy or otherwise. So everybody's forced to look at the local orders. Most of the states have now implemented guidance and orders that are consistent with the CDC guidance. So fully vaccinated individuals can pretty much be anywhere without a mask. But that creates the challenge for businesses, right? Because some people have full vaccination status and others do not. So an employer needs to look first at that local order, determine if they can implement a mask mandate or are not prohibited from implementing a mask mandate, and then move forward from there.
Right. And so, the big issue here is this language when we hear, a safe return to work for vaccinated employees. This then becomes sort of this privacy question regarding what employers can ask for in terms of health information. And then there's the issue of, can you ask employees, who have indicated that they won't be vaccinated, why won't they be vaccinated?
Right.
So, this gets into like these kind of complicated areas, and there's a lot of unfamiliar waters for people to wade through. So can you run us through some of the privacy challenges and advice you have for employers on how to handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's another great question. It's probably the one that I'm hearing most frequently from our clients throughout the country. First and foremost, the issue about bringing employees back safely, that's key. I mean, every business wants to ensure that their workforce is stable, and maintaining a stable workforce requires that we have employees available for work, obviously. So we don't want a whole bunch of people off of work due to COVID, due to other conditions that they have to associate or deal with at home. So bringing them back safely is going to be the key. As far as that question that we talked about a little bit earlier about, do you ditch the mask? And ditching the mask has to do with those who are fully vaccinated. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, it's the federal agency responsible for implementing and enforcing non-discrimination laws in the US, has given us guidance about what you can and what you cannot ask from a privacy nature or privacy status. So the law that primarily governs employers as it relates to healthcare information is either HIPAA or it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Most employers are not subject to HIPAA. In order to be subject to HIPAA, an employer would either have to have a self-insured insurance plan that it's administering itself, or an insured insurance plan, but it's still administering that plan itself. That's very atypical for employers, so we're not really worried about HIPAA compliance. What we are worried about is there protected healthcare information or information of a certain sort that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the employer must maintain confidentially or cannot ask for at all. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, employers are limited to asking health-related inquiries or making health-related inquiries to those that are business necessities. in a nutshell. Because we're still in a pandemic, the World Health Organization has not declared the pandemic over. Neither has the CDC as it relates to the US. Getting COVID information is still okay under the ADA according to the EEOC. So an employer is perfectly within its rights to ask its employees, are you fully vaccinated? And they are able to ask for proof or evidence of full vaccination status, such as the CDC vaccination card. There is no information on that CDC vaccination card that is subject to HIPAA. The information should be maintained confidentially, right, in a separate file, not the employee's regular personnel file, but it is perfectly within employer rights to ask for vaccination status and evidence of vaccination status. But you raised a really good point, and that is, what if somebody tells you, I'm not fully vaccinated and I don't intend to? Can you ask the why question? The why question actually gets into a little bit of a complicated area, as you pointed out. It's the why question that can lead down the line to a disability-related question, and that's prohibited by the ADA. So I have cautioned employers and counseled our clients, there's really no reason to go to the why question unless you have a mandatory vaccination policy, right? If your vaccination policy is still voluntary and you're saying to employees, listen, we're going to maintain our mask requirements unless you can establish full vaccination status. Once you ask for that full vaccination status, if the employee will not provide it, they're in a mask and you can maintain them in a mask. If you implement a mandatory vaccination policy, you can still ask for vaccination status. If the employee says, I'm not fully vaccinated, you can, at that point, ask why, right, in order to comply with our mandatory vaccination status. But you don't want to go too deeply. If the employee raises a disability concern, then that initiates what's known as the interactive process between that employee and the employer. If the employee raises a religious concern to the vaccination, then again, you can get into a little bit of a discussion on the religious issues, but those really should be taking place between the human resource department and the employee, not supervisors, not managers and the employees. I hope that answers.
No, definitely. And this is all, it's interesting stuff because I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this.
No, definitely not. I mean, I am unaware of any employers implementing mandatory vaccination programs or policies outside of the healthcare related field. So this is a first.
Yeah, of course it just makes sense there. You know, this is like we've been saying, it's kind of a larger safety issue, workplace safety issue. And so with that, you start to think about OSHA a little bit and the implications that are at play here. In terms of OSHA, add a layer of complexity. Can you kind of outline some of those things for HR folks, you know, what they need to think about when it comes to workplace safety from that regulatory standpoint?
Sure. And again, it's a very good question. The question really is it OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that's going to have application to my workplace safety as a business, or is it some state component? Under the federal structure for OSHA, health and safety, there are 22 states that have their own state health and safety regulatory units. So for example, California has Cal OSHA, Washington has WAOSHA, Oregon has OROSHA, and it goes on. But of those 22 states, you still have to comply with that state's safety and health regulations. The federal OSHA never came out with any emergency, temporary, or regular standards as it related to COVID. Those have been in the works for some time, but when the CDC came out about a week and a half ago with this guidance that said, listen, fully vaccinated people are really safe, the drive to implement an emergency OSHA standard probably is falling by the wayside, because it will be a real challenge now for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to actually get permission to push those through. But that doesn't change the fact that, as you pointed out, employers have a duty and an obligation to offer a safe workplace to their employees. So what does that mean? From the federal OSHA standpoint, that means following the CDC guidance. Federal OSHA has told us that follow the CDC guidance, and we believe compliance with that guidance will create a safe workplace as it relates to COVID. So social distancing, masking, vaccination programs, disinfection, cleaning commonly used or touched surfaces. Employers need to continue all of that unless they can show that their workforce is fully vaccinated. There's a real question about, okay, do we need 100% vaccination, or in the workforce, might we be able to get by with that herd immunity that we've been told about? Maybe only 70% of our workforce needs to be fully vaccinated. That's not yet been clear. Depending on what state you operate in, the state OSHA laws are a little bit different. California has specific requirements for masking, not masking, what industries require masking, which industries do you have to conduct contact tracing, which industries do you have to send employees home and pay them while they're home. So it really comes down to knowing your state law, just like we talked about with respect to the first question, and then getting comfortable with what that state administration wants to see from a safe workplace. Just about all of the state OSHA laws require some form of plan for return that includes masks, social distance, and disinfection. So any plan should include those three topics and contact tracing in case an outbreak develops. But it's a great question. From a regulatory compliance to maintain a safe workplace, always have to keep in mind the federal OSHA and the state OSHA if that has application to you.
You just mentioned, this just occurred to me, so I'm just gonna
Sure.
ask this, but
Go with it.
so if you've established that your workforce is fully vaccinated and you're starting to hire new people, can you make it a distinction that in order to work here, in order to get the job here, you have to be vaccinated?
It's a great question. And again, it's another one that we're seeing a lot, right? Because people are thinking, wait, if I have a fully vaccinated workforce and I want to bring in new employees, can I make a vaccinated individual a condition of employment, right? Am I okay to separate those who are vaccinated from those who are unvaccinated? Right now, under federal law, you can, depending on the state, right? So we're seeing in Florida, Texas, a number of states who have implemented kind of a no-ask policy and a policy of prohibition against taking an adverse action based on vaccination status. So again, employers are really subject to a hodgepodge of laws. You have to know the law that's applicable to your municipality, your county, and your state. If your county and municipality and state say free game or there is nothing in place, then federal law will not prevent an employer from making a vaccinated individual a condition of employment.
We've recently looked into the mandatory vaccine program possibility, employers working with states to provide vaccines and cover time to get them and deal with any side effects that go with them. I think you mentioned that before. So how common do you foresee mandatory vaccine programs becoming, or what are some of the bigger hurdles around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle around a mandatory vaccine program right now is the fact that the FDA has not provided full approval for any of our vaccines, right? All of the vaccines, including the Pfizer, which has already got a preliminary full approval, but has not got the FDA blessing yet, are issued or out there on what's called an EUA, or an emergency use authorization. Because it's an EUA, there are potential side effects that could be significant, although we've seen from science and data that we're not having a great many of those. But employers are appropriately concerned. If you mandate a vaccination that's subject to an EUA, you could become responsible for those adverse repercussions, right? So for example, with kids in schools or persons in the healthcare system, we've had mumps, rubella, and other disease vaccinations that are mandatory for years. Those are under a regular use authorization from the FDA. So mandating those vaccinations doesn't really carry any repercussions. Right now, until that EUA is converted to a regular authorization, I think we're not going to see a ton of mandatory vaccination policies, except in those areas that have more vulnerable populations, senior living, healthcare settings, things of that nature. Short of that, an employer is really totally up to it if they want to implement a mandatory vaccine policy. There can be, like I said, adverse reactions because it's an EUA could create some liability. But what we've seen with the COVID pandemic is a ton of the state legislatures have already implemented what they're calling indemnification laws, that if an employer does bring somebody back and either mandates a vaccination or brings them back into the workplace, any COVID-related concerns or developments will not be the basis for a lawsuit against that employer. I don't know if that's going to continue in that vein, but that's where we're at right now. I think as the emergency use authorization converts to a regular use, I think you're going to see more mandatory vaccination programs.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. It becomes just more a part of our lives, right? So.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's just like that mumps shot or whatever shot that you normally get.
So masking and social distancing for now are still effective ways to limit the spread of the virus. And well, I'm sure we're all looking forward to a day that isn't necessary. What advice do you have around creating a mask policy for employers?
Thanks. It's a great question. Again, I think the best advice I can give and it's advice that I'm giving to all of my clients, is do not chuck your mask policy and social distance policy yet, right? I think the CDC has given us good guidance throughout this pandemic. Masking is, as you've pointed out, the best and most effective means to curb the transfer of COVID-19. We don't want anybody in our workforce spreading it because it gives us fewer employees able to perform the services that we're desperate for. I mean, there's a huge need right now for employers for labor, and it's starting to bring that unemployment rate down and everything else. I recommend and counsel that employers maintain their social distancing rules, maintain that mask policy. But if they want to go the hybrid route, right, where you have some folks in masks, some folks not in masks, based on a full vaccination 2 weeks after your last shot, I think that's fine. And I am seeing more and more clients and employers implementing this hybrid mask policy as a means to encourage the employee population to frankly go out and get a shot, right? Most employers used incentives to try and get their employee population vaccinated. I think the idea or the concept that we can all return to normal, right? We can have that coffee talk around the water cooler or at somebody else's desk. People want that connection again. Getting the vaccination allows them to have that connection again. Most employers will check or collect vaccination card data so that they can start to put the mask policies aside, at least for some. But for now, best practice, keep your mask policy in place, keep your social distance in place until you have a fully vaccinated workforce.
Yeah, I think that was sort of the conclusion we arrived at as well. So
Yeah,
it would be a lot more people just encouraging it rather than making strict policies for a
I
little
agree.
while. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is a good talk and very educational. I think a lot of people will derive some value from this advice. So I want to appreciate. I
Yeah,
want to
no
thank you.
problems. Thanks, David, for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. Dan Kaplan from Foley and Lardner, everyone. And until next time, stay
Thanks.
safe.